Fantastic. Good afternoon, everyone. It's always great to be, hosting these series of webinars, which are hosted by Abu Dhabi University, a knowledge group consulting, and Go Learning. Today, we are very pleased to welcome actually a couple, maybe three speakers, Sean, Michael, and Julian. Today we will actually get another look at AI, however, from a different perspective. So we discussed in previous webinars how AI is being used in several industries, and we're looking at the future of work with AI. Today we're looking at something related to humanity. I don't know what that is anymore, but I think we're actually having a discussion this morning about how far can we go in having AI make decisions without the human touch, we called it. There should be a touch of humanity whenever we make decisions, because decisions are not always black and white. They sometimes come in various colors. And that's what we need to be careful for. Today, our speakers are Michael Raynor.
Hello.
Name correct. Hello, Michael. Michael actually is from Ivy Business School. He's been there for about 20, and he brings about 25 years of experience. Michael is like me. We have experience, but we're not old. We're just like young people. But he actually grappled with the twin challenges of innovation and uncertainty. As a consultant, he collaborated with clients in many and diverse sectors, including life sciences, technology, finance, consumer products, and heavy industry. And as a researcher, he has written 4 best-selling and critically acclaimed books, including The Innovator's Solution, co-authored with Clayton Christensen. It was sad that we've lost him, I think, last year, who wrote The Way of Innovation, or The Innovator's Dilemma. Actually, it was one of my favorites book, The Innovator's Dilemma.
He passed about 5 years ago, actually. It seems like yesterday.
Just seems like yesterday. Absolutely. In addition to that, I think New York's Best Times #3 seller, which is the Innovator's Solution, and The Strategy Paradox, which is one of the top 10 books of the year. Our esteemed speaker, Julian. Julian actually became the Dean of Ivy Business School last year, around August.
Correct.
And he's a graduate of Ivy, MBA, actually 91 and PhD in 95. So we're probably almost the same age. We are probably a better student than I am, probably older than you. Of course, Julian is an internationally renowned scholar in business research and education with expertise on innovation, digital transformation, and agility of large multinational firms. Prior to joining Ivy, he was at London Business School for 25 years, probably as a student for a long time and then graduating. The age, right? And most recently serving as the Vice Dean from 2022 to 2024 at LBS. While he was at LBS, I think he was served as Deputy Dean for Executive Education, so he probably knows Costas Markidis very well, who's our good friend. Yeah. Absolutely. Head of I think Director of the Institute of Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and Deputy Dean of Programs as well. He has passion for innovation and continuous improvement. He was instrumental actually in launching the new graduate programs, initiating online asynchronous programs, and significantly, if I can speak, growing the executive education. Of course, he's one of the top he's one of Thinkers 50, thought leaders in management. He focuses obviously on innovation, organization resilience, strategic agility, and the impact of digital technology on business. I can go on and on about you, John, but but I think, Julian, I think if there's anything else that you need to add, feel free to do
Yeah.
so.
Thank
Uh,
you.
However, without further, I would like to. I can't see your slides yet. Uh,
That's
Let me
great.
pull those up.
Yeah.
We can
yes,
get started.
yeah. And I thank you so much actually for being part of these webinar series. Um, I think there might be some sort of educational, maybe, things for some people. It's not about how you use AI, but how to use it in a very responsible way.
Exactly.
So with that, I will leave. I just have a couple of things I think to add. If you have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to type them in the QA section, and we will answer all these questions at the end of the session. And Julian and Michael, please, floor is yours.
Perfect.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for the kind introduction, Dr. Rabe. Pleased to be with you all here this afternoon. I wanted to begin our prepared remarks this morning by inviting you all to engage a little bit with the topic. Just to, as the image here might suggest, I want to take everyone's temperature on AI. Sean, if you could launch the first poll. Don't overthink this one, folks. But we'd like you to give us your spontaneous reaction to this particular poll question. How are you thinking about your organization's current use of AI in day-to-day operations? So there's just pick one of the answers there and see what you think. Sean, if you could give us an update on how many folks have had a chance to answer. We're not looking for anything here that's particularly profound, just your immediate instinctive reaction to how you think about AI, however you understand that term, however you understand what it means to actually apply it in some meaningful, useful way in your organization. As they like to say, no wrong answers. Just an opportunity to get a sense of how you, the audience, are engaging to whatever degree with AI. All right, so there's our answers, and that's actually fairly. Oh, I see. We've got a fairly thin response rate at this point, but that's not all bad. That said, not surprising, I suppose, that nobody is an AI-driven organization. That'd be pretty tough. Um, uh, for those of you who lived through the first dot-com boom, it's kind of like 2001, and people are advertising for web designers with 10 years experience, and it doesn't really work that way. So not a lot of folks deep into AI, as one might expect. Curiously enough, zero, not at all, which is a minor surprise. It's nice to see that in this group at least, folks are doing what they can to get ahead of the wave. So that's terrific. All right. So with that, let's begin some prepared remarks around how we want to some ways of thinking about AI that we found potentially useful. So I'd like to suggest a fairly simple 2x2 here as a way to think about human knowledge systems. The horizontal axis here speaks to computational power, just our ability to actually to crunch the data, if you will. And then ease of access, low and high, just how easy is it for people to access and use and apply that computational power in a profound way. So go back to the ancient Greeks, and it was the human expert model, and that was the human knowledge model for millennia. You've heard of the notion of horsepower. Well, we had brain power systems, and our best system was one brain power. And you went to it, right? That was the oracle at Delphi. You went there, asked your question, got an answer, sacrificed a goat, went on your way, right? So that's one way of thinking about a fairly low computational power system and a relatively low ease of access. Hard to get there, can't do much once you found it. A high computational power system became mainframe computing, right? Centralized computing through the beginning really with the Second World War up through the 50s, 60s, into the 70s. We had increasingly powerful computational platforms, but not particularly easy to use, right? All the way back to do not fold, spindle, muticate, and punch cards up through centralized access, or rather distributed access to centralized terminals. Vastly more powerful, but still somewhat inflexible. The internet revolution of the late 90s, 2000s got us into the upper left, right? We had something that was very easy to access. Anybody, anywhere could get access to pretty much anything. But the computational power really was still relatively low. Much of what we had created was a mechanism to access pre-existing information. And that's about all, right? The ability to synthesize, integrate, make sense of, and do something new with what you were able to find was still pretty limited. You know, as the saying went on the internet, no one knows you're a dog. And so as a result, enormous step forward, right? A lot better than the Oracle at Delphi, but still a long way to go. And where we find ourselves today, right, is potentially in that upper right quadrant, which, as ever, in every 2x2, that's where you want to be. You've got something that's got high levels of computational power, very easy to access, and that starts to change the game, right? Rather than having to make a trade-off between power and access, we've actually broken that trade-off potentially, and so now we're in a whole new world, arguably. As this quotation from Eric Schmidt suggests, in 3 to 5 years, everyone everywhere will have access to the smartest human on every problem in their pocket. That is not the Oracle at Delphi. That is not HAL from IBM. That is not the World Wide Web. That is something that, frankly, we don't really have a language to describe yet. And so the question becomes, how do we make use of this potential? How do we create something new and desirable with what seems now to be possible? So a way to think about that is to begin looking at what our initial deployments of AI might actually suggest. So one way that I found helpful to organize my thinking, at least, is again to look at this in 2 dimensions. One is the sophistication of the AI platforms that we're using, and the difficulty of the task they're being applied to. Because in most every instance, it's a collaboration between the AI and the people involved. So the world's a pretty complicated place, and so I'm capturing this as a continuous function. You can think about some applications where the sophistication is pretty high, but the task difficulty is actually fairly low. And so as a result, it tends to be something that's driven by the AI and overseen by humans, right? So think about customer service chatbots. What they can actually do, right? The task difficulty pretty limited because it's largely just an if-then frequently asked questions retrieval. You know, my Wi-Fi is down. What should I do? Well, the answer is turn it off and turn it on again. We know that, and you can automate that with a bot very effectively, reduce costs enormously, increase efficiencies, increase customer satisfaction, because you're using the AI to create a natural language interface, right? A natural language Q&A, as opposed to having to train customers in how to interact with your question and answer archive. Right? So you're able to automate these customer service interactions. That has enormous value, a very sophisticated application, but again, very low task difficulty. At the other extreme, you've got things where the sophistication of the AI is relatively limited, but the task difficulty is very high. And here you've got something where you've got AIs augmenting human expertise. So you see things like this in fields like radiology, where you can train AIs to read X-rays, to read MRIs, to read sonograms, to a level of accuracy and consistency that in many instances exceeds human expertise, but still, when lives are at stake, you want the intuition, you want the expertise, you want the human touch, if you will, to be involved in making those decisions. So now you've got something where the very best radiologists are now able to increase their productivity. They're able to interpret the diagnostic images from a larger number of patients with more sophisticated, more challenging diagnostic data far better than they could otherwise. So the AI is augmenting a human rather than automating a task. And in that broad middle ground, something like computer programmers, for example, you have something that kind of splits the difference. It's relatively sophisticated applications, relatively difficult tasks, and now it's not automating a task. You're not augmenting the expertise of a human. You're really kind of collaborating. I've suggested that this is accelerating the productivity of some of the very best, in this case, programmers, but there are other applications as well where you see this collaboration between AI and humans. Now, to make life a little simpler, we're going to take that continuous space, turn it back into our 2x2 and say, all right, we've got automation, acceleration, augmentation. What's in that upper right space? Well, in each case, right, in each of the three types of applications that I've suggested here, the initial application does one job really well, and it's what I've called profitable. That is to say, it makes economic sense, right? It's not like you're subsidizing, it's not a science project. You're not necessarily merely trying to learn, you're actually doing something worthwhile. So in each of these initial foothold applications, you're creating real value. In each instance, there is an underlying enabling technology. That is to say, the type of AI platform that's being developed gets better and gets cheaper over time, which means that from wherever you're beginning, automation, acceleration, or augmentation, you're not stuck in that particular quadrant. You're able to move because as the technology gets better, either cheaper in the case of augmentation, or better as in the case of automation, or both as in the case of acceleration, you're able to start moving to other points in that difficulty sophistication space. But what really makes that possible, and Julian will have to say much, will have much more to say about this, there's an extensible business model. Now that's a bit of jargon, but what it's intended to capture is that whatever processes you build to take advantage of the capabilities of AI, they have to be able to absorb the technical improvements without having to completely reinvent all of your processes. After all, if you have to completely reinvent your business processes every time the technology is 10% better, you'll spend all your time chasing the technology as opposed to actually realizing the benefit. And so this will become a critically important dimension of how we are able to absorb and exploit what AI makes possible. But wherever you begin, if you're able to tick these three boxes, if you've got a viable initial application, you've got an improving enabling technology, and you have a flexible, extensible business model, then wherever you begin, you're likely able to approach what I'll call autonomization, right? The ability to actually see AI be a highly sophisticated platform tackling enormously difficult tasks, essentially all on its own. So what might that look like? Well, in the augmentation space, the trade-off there is that you're highly effective, but the danger is that you'll overfit the technology. So you go into a radiology department, and again, lives are at stake. So you will optimize the application of that technology to that particular task, and that threatens to limit your ability to move into other areas. How do you go from things like radiology in oncology to the interpretation of personal fitness tracker data in orthopedics, right? So if you overfit the technology to a specific application, you're going to limit your ability to expand the scope of its application over time. In the acceleration space, you tend to have a high degree of flexibility, but consistency gets compromised. And so similarly, if, for example, you're building AI platforms to support computer programmers, that's going to be highly flexible, but things like prompt development and so forth become highly bespoke, almost to the point of being unique to individual people within your organization. That makes it difficult to generalize what you learn and apply it to new settings. And then finally, if you're beginning in an automation phase, well, you'll be highly efficient, but now you've got the mirror image problem of augmentation. You're probably going to overfit the systems and processes to whatever the technology is currently able to do. And so what that means is that as the technology gets better, you're having to completely retool systems, and that's going to limit your ability to expand the scope of its application. So what this is intended to capture is the notion that as in your organizations, you look for areas where you can use AI with benefit, you may find yourself discovering, hey, look, this is looking more like augmentation, this is looking more like automation, and this is intended to flag for you the things to watch out for, so that what you're not doing is simply optimizing for an initial application, but in fact thinking long term about how you can grow into more demanding, higher value added applications over time as the technology inevitably improves and gets less expensive. So the underlying metaphor here, it seems to me, is that success, moving from wherever you happen to begin to wherever you happen to want to go, is almost certainly possible, but by no means guaranteed. And so my suggestion is to take this three-part checklist as a way to think about the growth and the expansion of the application of AI in your organizations over time, by way of analogy to, well, in this case, climbing Mount Everest. right? You want to understand your starting point. Choose carefully and accept the implications of the choices you make, right? When it comes to climbing Everest, which I have never done, but I'm told that there are 3 major routes, the North Col, the South Col, the Northwest Face. They each have their own trade-offs. You can get to the top via any route, but you need to be prepared for the very different challenges that each presents. Similarly, if you have initial applications of AI in the augmentation, automation, or acceleration spaces, you can get to an autonomization peak. You can get to the pinnacle of the application of AI from wherever you begin, but there are particular implications of a given starting point. In particular, you want to be ready for the predictable challenges, right? If you're climbing Everest, you know it's going to be tough. You know the camp is going to be less than you wanted. You know the weather is always going to be bad. And similarly, when you're trying to apply AI more broadly in an organization, you will run into challenges of how much it costs, the performance you're able to deliver, the speed with which you can roll out these innovations. This will always be less than you'd hope for, but the good news is it'll almost always be as much as you need. And so the ability to think clearly about how to adopt the technology and adapt systems along the way is something you know you are going to have to do. And finally, it's important to accept the fact that you can only push so hard, right? Teams scaling Everest, the teams are only so capable, the equipment can only handle so much, and the food runs out at some point. So there is a maximum effective change, and you want to maintain your minimum viable alignment. As a Canadian, I'll say, don't get out over your skis, right? So it's important to understand that these things can only go so far, so fast. Almost certainly, the technology will progress faster than your organizations, but the two must progress in tandem if ultimately you are going to reach the summit of the AI, of the application of AI, by aligning people, technology, and your organization. So my hope is that that brief overview provides a way to think about some of the challenges and opportunities of AI, at least as a starting point. Before I pass the baton to my colleague Julian here, I'd like to launch our second poll and ask folks, perhaps relying on some of the framing that I've suggested here, how would you expect your organization to be using AI a year from now? Right? So we started with the question, where are you right now today? Where do you think you might be a year from now? Still sitting on the sidelines? Will you be exploring AI, emerging a fully integrated use into existing processes? Or, as we suggested at the outset, will you be an AI-driven organization, however you understand that term at the moment? I think we've got a fairly intimate audience here, Sean, so we probably don't need to wait too long before we have our answers. I can see we've had quite a few people join, so that's good news. Any commentary on that so far, Julian?
Thanks, that's good. And if you can take your slides down and I'll put mine up, that would be great.
Yeah, let's do that.
And we see the answers are a real mix, actually, not using AI at all. We've got equal numbers for exploring and emerging use and integrated. So obviously progress from where we are today. So thank you, Michael. That was terrific. I'm going to take over and I'm just going to share my slides. And if you'll just give me 2 seconds, those slides should now be available. Michael, do you want to just give me a thumbs up? So
yeah, we got it.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So yeah, fascinating to hear Michael talk about essentially what artificial intelligence can do for your organizations, whatever sector you're in terms of some of the new products, some of the new ways in which people are getting value out of them. My talk is complementary because I'm going to be talking more about how we use AI inside our organizations. And we're going to get into this issue of what it means to do this responsibly. And like Michael, I'm also going to give you a couple of little polls to help you think. So my talk is about specifically generative AI, and you all know what we mean by generative AI nowadays. Most of you use ChatGPT, I suspect. Some of you might use Claude or Perplexity or Gemini or any of the other large language models out there. And many of us don't have a clue what is sort of underneath the technology, but we know that it is giving us useful information, useful tools and technologies that allow us to do our jobs better. And so the questions that I often get asked, which I'm going to try to answer in the next 10 or 15 minutes, are what is the effect that AI is having on us in terms of our individual productivity, our collective productivity as organizations? What sort of effect is it having on employee engagement? And which jobs are at risk? So I'm going to take each of those questions in turn for about 3 minutes each. Let me start with individual productivity. This is a very easy point to make because there is now very good evidence out there that as individuals, those of us who are experimenting with technology, with AI, particularly those of us who are in, I'm going to call them sort of professional knowledge jobs, which is probably most of the people on the call, we are seeing provable improvements in productivity. So one study, for example, found that people using AI compared to a group who were not using AI got 12% more tasks completed, 25% faster, and at higher quality, significantly higher quality. And then what you see on the right-hand side is a little study which just came out 2 months ago, proving that not only does AI help individuals to do their jobs better, but you can actually get a team of people using AI and you can get demonstrable improvements in the performance of those teams as well. So AI, generative AI, is a teammate. It's a sort of a tech teammate which is helping you to be more productive. There's a couple of little wrinkles. It is a fact that AI is helping poorer performers more than higher performers. So as a faculty member and as a dean at a business school, one of the things I worry about is how can we, as it were, assess who are the best performing and worst performing students. AI is making our job harder because, of course, even the worst students, the least good students, are able to raise their standards to an acceptable level of quality thanks to AI. It's also interestingly the case that it's better at doing what we might call creative tasks, so sort of brainstorming new solutions, new segments, new product categories, than it is actually helping you to make decisions. It's better at divergent activities than convergent activities. So individual productivity is being improved, as likewise group productivity is being improved. But then the question about what effect it's having on organizations as a whole is a little bit more challenging. And we're going to launch a poll here. Sean, if you can show poll number 3, I'm going to just get you to have a go at this. So to what extent do you think AI will impact employee productivity in your organization as a whole, not just individuals, but as a whole, over the next 1 to 2 years? And if you can just click on one of those 5 answers, we'll give you 10, 20 seconds to answer. And obviously, not at all means I suspect it will have no impact whatsoever. Who knows? Through to a transformational impact. I'm quite curious as to see what the distribution is there. So click on one of those buttons, and then in a few seconds, I think Sean's going to show us the answers. And we will see what comes through. And the answer is significant impact and moderate impact are the highest scores. And many people aren't choosing to answer. That's fine. But I'm seeing a little bit of a distribution. And I guess that's roughly what I would expect. I mean, I can't prove what the impact will be. And of course, to some degree, it's up to you to make that impact your own. But what I do know for sure is that experts have very, very different views on this. I'll just show you the sort of headlines from 2 very well-known studies. One is from McKinsey Global Institute. They reckoned we were going to see an annual GDP growth improvement of 3 to 4% every year between now and 2040. That is huge. If that happened, the world economically would be transformed. A guy called Daron Acemoglu, you've never heard of him probably, but he was the most recent Nobel Prize winner in economics, actually, from MIT. He said he estimates actually it'll be about 1/100th of the level of McKinsey. So about 0.5% over a 10-year period. That is a huge difference. And I won't bore you with the details of how they came to their views. But the key point here is we don't know what the impact will be because it hasn't happened yet. We are seeing all these places where individuals are getting productivity improvements, but we're not yet seeing the evidence about how that will play out at the organizational level. And I'll tell you why. It's very simple, conceptually why, which is that any new technology, this could be ChatGPT and generative AI, It could be the internet. It could be the smartphone. It could be any technology that we've looked at in recent years. And what we see time after time is that improvements happen at three levels. First of all, we do existing things a little bit more efficiently. So many of you, for example, are using ChatGPT, I'm going to bet, to help you write articles or essays or a speech. You might use it to make your graphics on your PowerPoint presentations a little bit better. And then we figure out new things we can do which we haven't done before. There's some opportunities to use these technologies to actually come up with ways of presenting your ideas perhaps that you hadn't thought of. And then the third area, which is actually where the real performance improvement comes, is when you redesign the entire system around the technology. So let me explain what I mean by that. If you think about the smartphone revolution, obviously Apple led the smartphone revolution with the touch phone, with the iPhone. This was 15 years ago. Originally, we used smartphones just as we used traditional phones. We used them to make calls. We used them then to start communicating via text and things. And then we started to use them for things we couldn't do before. A lot of games were created for use on the smartphone for people who commute into work. But it's only when the smartphone became this device that was oriented around our lives that it really started giving us productivity improvements. If you have ever been to China, you'll know that they have a thing called WeChat there. And WeChat is this super app. So, for those of us who live in the Western world, WeChat is the equivalent to having Facebook plus Uber plus your delivery service plus access to Expedia, all of these apps integrated together into a single mega app. And by designing the entire ecosystem applications around the user, they've made people's lives in China a whole lot easier. And that is the point we haven't yet got to with generative AI. The point is, generative AI, we've ticked box number 1, we're ticking box number 2 right now, and we do not yet know how box 3 will work out. And that is why it is so hard to know what the productivity benefits will be. I'll just leave you with this final thought on that question, which is, it's from a study done a while back, which was looking at the productivity growth from earlier generations of information technology revolution. So this is from the 1990s. And the key insight from this graph is that productivity is the vertical dimension on this axis. So the yellow bar at the back is the companies that got real productivity growth out of a combination of investing in new technology, but also investing in workplace innovation, new ways of working within the company. So if you've ever tried using agile methods, for example, in group work, in trying to develop new technologies, new systems, new software platforms, that's an example of innovative work practices. In order to get the payoffs from new technology, you need to change the human part of the work. It's as simple as that. And many organizations that I work with are grappling right now with this question about how do we rethink our processes around artificial intelligence rather than just simply using the artificial intelligence in a bunch of silos. Okay, two final points, and then I'm going to wrap up, and then we're going to take some questions. If we move to employee engagement, here's a beautiful quote that I stole from somebody. Her name is Joanna on the internet. She said, the biggest problem with all this AI is that it's going in the wrong direction. I want AI to do my laundry and my dishes so I can do art and writing, not for AI to do my art and writing so I can do laundry and dishes. And, it's a bit of fun, really. But the point she makes is right, which is that we can't be entirely sure which tasks AI is going to do better than humans. And so that creates a huge challenge for organizations. And this is going to be my sort of intro to the final poll. So if you can show the final poll, Sean, which is, will AI impact employee engagement positively or negatively? In other words, employee engagement is essentially how good people feel about coming to work. I'm motivated to do a good job. I've got good friends around me at work. I'm inspired by the opportunities that are created. And my question to you is, do you think AI is going to increase employee engagement significantly? Is it actually going to hurt engagement, or is it going to have no impact? So I'll just get a few people to answer that question. and then we'll see what the answers are. And the answer, of course, well, we'll see what the poll says, and then I'll tell you what I think. Fascinating. So we've got a kind of a bipolar split. We've got a few people saying it could actually hurt engagement. And then a few people on the other end who are saying actually it's going to have a real positive impact. So I really like that result. And I'll tell you why. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to present both arguments, essentially the argument that it could hurt engagement and then the argument that it could help engagement. So here's the argument that it could hurt engagement. There was a famous management theorist from 100 years ago. His name was Frederick Winslow Taylor. And he created scientific management, which was the automation of tasks so that people basically just did what they were told without actually using their brain. And if you think about the way that AI could be used tomorrow, I mean, even today, think about how an Amazon worker, for example, is told how to deliver their products around all the different places on their route. The coordination of activities is efficient, processes get automated, we end up with decisions being made for us by algorithms, and jobs become narrower. That's a very gloomy vision of the future. And it's one that I don't like and one which I don't believe is actually going to happen, but it could if we use AI in, I'm going to say, an irresponsible way. So what's our opportunity? Our opportunity is to use AI in a much more responsible way and to actually find ways to ensure that it is used to help to democratize the workplace, by which I mean giving everybody the power to make their own decisions when it is appropriate to do so. So we make the low value added tasks more efficient, and that frees us up to do the more interesting things that we want to do. So let me just finish with a quick thought about the effect on the jobs that we have. You know, people always say, will I still have a job in a world of artificial intelligence? And the short answer is probably yes. In other words, if you look at previous waves of technological change, this is an example of what happened to jobs after the spreadsheet was invented. You all know Excel as Microsoft's spreadsheet product. Well, the original spreadsheet was called VisiCalc back in the late 70s, early 80s. What you can see in this chart, the number of people who were in jobs as bookkeepers, people adding up numbers, went into quite rapid decline over the following 20 years. But the number of people in analytical roles and the number of people auditing numbers actually went up dramatically. So we can expect some job categories to disappear with generative AI, things like, for example, translation services, many coding jobs. But other jobs will emerge in their place. We don't know exactly what those jobs are. Here's just, for a little bit of fun, a few of the job categories I've seen coming along in the last few years. Some of these are now well-established job categories. Some of them are just emerging. And the point is we can't predict exactly what will happen. All we know is that every time a set of jobs get killed off, new jobs emerge in their space. And so the key point here is very simple, which is that as AI gets better, some job categories will continue to grow and be invented. And those will be the jobs that are harnessing our truly human qualities. What are those human qualities? Well, I've listed some of them here: creativity, empathy, the ability to kind of relate to other people, our ability to use our intuition, our ability to use our judgment, our manual dexterity, some things robots can't do yet. And those are the things, those are the job categories which most of all will be surviving as we go forward. So I'm going to stop and I'm going to open up for some discussion. To summarize my little talk, yes, individual productivity is improving, absolutely. Organizational productivity should improve, but it requires changes to the human and organizational aspects, not just the technological aspects of work. And thirdly, as we use technology in a responsible way, we can expect employee engagement to go up as well. So with that, I will finish. Thank you very much. Dr. Rabea, I'm going to hand back to you for some discussion.
Thank you so much. That's actually very interesting look at AI and its uses within organizations. It's interesting that people, almost half the people, there was a split between whether it increases engagement or not. But this is the case with everything in HR. I've never seen anything in HR that everybody agrees on. Everybody says different ideas. Performance management, yes, is good. Performance management is not. It's crippling for the organization. Anything else, but that's fine. My question, and we were discussing this earlier today. We had hosted some sort of a roundtable discussion on how AI is changing the workforce and the development of workforce. So it can analyze things, taking into consideration that it has no bias in its initial input and programming. But there is, and I want to, ask my first question probably on from the angle of humanity. At what point do we rely fully on AI to communicate, to make decisions? Considering now, for example, you can go to see a physician, probably a trained AI would know more probably than the physician would. And he doesn't need to be specialized. He'd be actually a generalist, and he knows more than all the doctors in one hospital. And is able to read, the MRIs, the X-rays, the blood tests, and so on and so forth, and prescribe you a medicine that is probably doesn't benefit pharmaceuticals, which is good, right? Just give you something like my mother say, peel potatoes, boil them, and use the water to put them on your knees, and they will get better. It's like, okay, fine. She leaves everything on the internet. But at what point? But then so that's good example. But the other examples are making decisions on attrition rates or attrition of employees, and who's at risk at leaving your organization, and what do organizations, how do they react to that? Do they preempt that by starting to recruit, or do they preempt that by engaging people and try to retain them? So the ethical question, just like with everything probably, and we're so good humans at making bad things out of good things.
Well, I'll give you my answer. Michael will undoubtedly have a view as well, which is that we certainly aren't yet at a place where we can take the humans out of the loop. I mean, there is a lot of talk right now about agentic AI. In other words, AI agents acting on our behalf. And I believe that we're not yet in a place where that we can afford to do that, because, a lot of the time AI is still kind of learning the game. And it does make mistakes, and it does hallucinate, and there are still some biases. And frankly, we need assurance. Our customers need assurance, particularly if you're, a doctor, that this solution has been fact checked, that has been sort of sense checked. So I think that right now, it is a very, very useful decision aid. I am still very wary about the idea that we would use it to actually implement decisions for us. And that's really gets back to this point about responsible use. So for me, it's high tech and high touch together. Michael, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, having been accused of having an opinion, I suppose I'd best come up with one. I think to my way of thinking, what drives that is who's making a decision on the other side and of a particular transaction, particular event, and what kind of acceptance is required by the people for whom a decision is being made. So here's what I mean by that. You go to see your oncologist. The oncologist says, I have really no idea what any of this means, but the AI says we should do this. Well, as a patient, that's not cool, right? I mean, an organization where you go to people say, well, I don't really know if we should hire or fire. I don't have an opinion about that. But the AI says we should do the following, right? So the ability of the organization of individual people whom you are dealing with to accept a decision and act upon it when they think it is a disembodied, completely black boxed agentic AI algorithm that is telling everybody what to do, they're not going to swallow that decision. Nobody's going to implement it with the kind of discretionary effort that's required to be successful. Right. So if that's personal view at the moment. But when you look, curiously enough, at some literally life or death applications in the military, for example, in warfare, when speed is at a premium, right? When it doesn't matter if the decision is 40% wrong, so long as it happens 20% faster, well, then I think you'll see agentic AI taking the lead, because the ability to make good enough decisions ever more rapidly, almost regardless of the stakes, then I think that's how we end up tipping over into the kind of agentic AI that Julian's describing. So to try and put that on a bumper sticker, for as long as you need to engage somebody else to accept and adopt your decision, I think the people you're dealing with will want to know that people are taking responsibility for those choices. When that's not critical, well, then I think it becomes an efficiency speed game, and I think our new computer overlords have the edge.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's my follow-up, actually, on your point of view, because I mean, as I said, I was speaking at a conference on the use of AI in learning and development, and before I started, I held up a microphone and said, "Think of 5 things you can do with that." Right, and after 30 seconds, I asked them, "Do you think of amplifying sound?" There were like few people who actually raised their hands. I don't know why. But I don't know why would you think microphone could amplify sound, but anyway. And then who thought of using it as a paperweight? Nobody. But here's the thing, right? The catch is that who thought about using it to hit somebody on the head? That it can be used to hit somebody on the head. And almost everybody in the room raised their hands. We're so good at weaponizing things and making, bad things about them. Exactly. But your point was, well, somebody saying, I don't have an opinion, but AI thinks this should be done. People won't buy it. But what if you put a human face to it? Right?
Yeah.
So AI makes a decision, and I come and say, well, in my expert opinion, this is what's happening, and you need to do 1, 2, 3, 4. And people will buy that.
I think so. Well, there's a greater possibility that that it will be acceptable, because there is moral responsibility being accepted by an agent from whom we are willing to accept, right, the embrace of that responsibility. So in the military, they talk about keeping humans in the loop, right? This goes all the way back to war games in 1981. Ultimately you want the 5-star general, you want the leader of the country making the big decisions, even if all the input comes from whatever the other sources happen to be. If somebody stands up and says, I own this decision, that's what's required. And for as long as that's the case, then it seems to me that falls importantly short of agentic AI. Right. Seems to me, right? Feel free to disagree, but for the moment, at least, that seems to be a bright line. That is a qualitative difference in decision-making process.
Yeah. No, I mean, I completely agree with that. And of course, the people who write about this stuff are always a long way ahead of actual practice. And for people on the call, in terms of what should you be doing, my advice is always to, definitely encourage your colleagues, your employees, to experiment with these technologies. I mean, you've got to learn how to use them, but let somebody else kind of do the real kind of bleeding edge stuff around trying out agentic AI to make decisions for you, because frankly, it's not quite ready yet to be used. We need to build the guardrails. The whole theme here around responsible AI is we need to make sure we have the guardrails to make sure these things do not get either weaponized, sort of used intentionally badly, or used badly by mistake, which is, of course, equally dangerous. And I actually do have quite a lot of confidence that both governments and the big tech companies are giving quite a lot of thought to trying to make sure that these technologies are being used in sort of benign ways.
Okay. But now we're actually discussing this from a subjective point of view. So think about now the kids, right? So you have 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds who are actually relying on, AI in order to help them, support them. They ask them questions, they answer them, and they take the answers that come from, the engines like ChatGPT, Claude, as if it's the truth.
Right.
So what happens when they are at our age and making decisions like that?
Yeah.
Would they accept? So that's the, I don't know if
Yeah,
anybody
well,
has an answer, but it's a,
no, it's a terrific question. And because, Michael and I work at the Ivy Business School, we are leading proponents of learning, and particularly what we think of as case study based learning, where people have to read a case study in advance. Well, we know that the students nowadays, some of them are plugging the case study into ChatGPT to give them the answer. And so the students will come to class. They will have 3 or 4 kind of summary points, but many of them have not actually read the case study in depth. And the real risk is that because they are almost shortcutting the learning process and trying to just get to the answer, they haven't developed the kind of almost like the critical thinking capacities to evaluate what's the kind of the right answer or not. So I'm agreeing with you completely, Dr. Rabea, and I'm saying it's actually up to us as educators to make sure that the learning process is sufficiently messy that they can't just jump to the answer. We've got to give them a structured way of helping them to learn through a social process of interacting with their colleagues, discussing, building arguments in order to make sure that they've got the skills to evaluate whether ChatGPT is giving them the right answer.
Yeah.
great. So actually, you touched on, sorry, I apologize. Michael, please go ahead.
Michael, go ahead.
Merely going to observe that, to your point, Dr. Ray, it's a scary time because the 10, 12-year-olds that are doing the things, using ChatGPT as part of their everyday lives, using them as friends and confidants, using them as ersatz psychologists. There are people who explicitly coach ChatGPT to become a romantic partner and go through these absolutely heart-wrenching emotional breakups because the ChatGPT memories only have so much buffer. And after about 4 or 5 months of the relationship, the thing resets and people are absolutely emotionally crushed. There's going to be a lot of emotional wreckage. Because the selection pressures will ultimately catch up with people who make the kinds of mistakes that Julian's described, right? People who fake their way through it, who get, to pick up on my earlier metaphor, people who make it to Camp 2 on Mount Everest by faking their way through it are going to die on the ascent to the summit because they haven't done the work required to go beyond what the agents can give them. And it is so seductive to take the easy way out and not see the long-term consequences of having not done the kind of work that Julian's described. It's kind of like, I remember an old joke about somebody who was fabulously wealthy and got their butler to go to the gym for them. Okay, fair enough. But when it comes time to go to your physical, I got bad news for you, right? You're actually not in shape. And people are going to find out the hard way that cheating their way through, if you will, the learning process does not make them smart. And so what Julian's alerting us to is that we are in the process of figuring out how to make it. Initially, we just have to settle for making it difficult. Ultimately, we want to make it preferable and more engaging and more satisfying to actually go through the learning process that we all must go through.
Exactly.
So I, for example, use case studies for assessing people, right? Behavioral assessments and so on. And we're thinking, okay, so let them use ChatGPT. It's fine. However, we have to design something that actually ChatGPT is not able to give the answers to, not because it doesn't know, but because actually there are things that a real person needs to read and do that. And it is not as easy as it would. Especially that we're trained since we're children to do shortcuts. The easiest way, make it as efficient as possible, as quick as possible. This is what it looks like. Now, one of the things as well we discussed actually is the topic of how AI is affecting development of people, generally speaking, and leadership development. So we came to discuss some ideas about how it's great to analyze the information you have, to help you design, develop content, right? And then it comes to the implementation. But we agreed that AI cannot help you unless you want to help yourself as a leader, right? So you have to have the mindset to learn. And there is no escape the human interaction because leadership is about people. Is that what's your 100%. Thought?
I mean, so let me just say one thing on that, which is that, you know, as we know, the way that one learns is one develops knowledge. You then apply that knowledge in a situation, and then you get sort of feedback on how well you've done, and then you kind of practice. And it is actually possible to use AI as a coach. I mean, it's very easy to set up ChatGPT to give you coaching, and, you know, it's essentially to type in to it, you know, how you're doing something, and then to have it feedback to you how you might do it better. But many people can't be bothered to do that. It's actually well designed for that, but it is not. It's not so easy to sort of take the time to do that. So I think as we get better at using these technologies, learning development in the round, which is knowledge and experimentation and reflection, all of these things together are necessary. And I think we're just sort of on the edge of figuring out how to use the technology to help us. At Ivy, we're developing a little product actually, which is it's almost like a simulation of a case study where we've created an AI instructor who actually provides feedback to the individual on their case analysis and sort of nudges them towards a better understanding of the case. And the idea is that we're going to use this to help students to prepare properly before they then go into the class. So to try to use AI in a kind of creative way rather than just simply to provide the answer.
Absolutely. Additionally, if I may add, we think that you know, AI is a kind of a reactive tool, right? So you ask it to give you coaching, right? But actually, I think probably the most important thing is to take the first step, as we've known that since God knows when, right? Take the first step. Is that design it to give you a prompt in the morning, for example, about something, to ask you about something, so that it works. But it really needs the person to become interested in their development and understanding, you know, the value of their development. But here's where we struggled. So how can you make people interested in that?
Good question. I mean, I think we may be out of time, but maybe Michael, you want to have any thoughts on that? How do we make
well, I'd best pass. I have something that's a bit ill-formed, so I don't want to overstay my welcome.
So I think it's a question that we need to
it's a great question.
Right? That's something to contemplate on, let's say, like everyone else. But think about it, it's like, you know, how can you actually, you know, inspire people from not motivate them from outside and tell them, you know, you need to do this. It's like become inspired to go and learn and take the proactive. Because, you know, it's very easy now with this.
I mean, it's identical conceptually to, I know it's good for me to go swimming in the morning, but I can't be bothered. So I need to sort of force myself to have the discipline to do it. I mean, it's exactly the same concept. I've got to force myself to have the discipline to use my AI in a way that I know is going to help me. So there's a whole kind of conversation there about sort of self-management and self-discipline that we should save for another conversation.
Good. Julian, Michael, thank you so much. We really value your presence, your input into this. It was very informative, and thank you for the discussion and for the you know, patience that you've demonstrated when answering my questions, which are sometimes a little silly, but, you know, a little bit, you know, we want to understand more. This is what humans do. It's a pleasure to meet you, and I hope that we get to meet, I think, in person at some point soon.
I hope so.
Right?
Thank you very much. Look forward to meeting you, and thank you everybody for listening.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.